Hey horror fans and ghouls, today's horror movie review is gonna be of Blood Feast from 1963, a Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. It's available on Shudder in case you're wondering. So he's the director of Wizard of Gore. That's probably his most famous movie, and this is a staple of the drive-in market. Very sort of grimy, hammy, over-the-top style of filmmaking from the 60s. It sold them out around the block, or so it says on Shudder, and I'm sure they wouldn't make up something like that. So the insane trippy plot is then a woman of society hires this guy Ramos to put on a feast for her daughter, a special party for her daughter. She's a rich lady who wants the best party, and he says, sure, I'll put on a special ceremony dinner. I'll put on a feast soup for pharaohs. He starts talking about ancient Egyptian, and secretly he goes away and gets a statue. He starts meditating and chanting, and his whole deal is then he finds women, he kills them, and he lops off their body parts, and he uses them as flesh and meat for the meal, and everything seems above board and fine, as according to the people in the movie. So we get the opening kill scene, which is an example of just how slow everything is in the movie, how slowly everybody reacts to things, because this creepy guy just randomly shows up out of nowhere in this woman's shower, and she's very slow to realise, she's very slow to react. Once again, this is super low budget, super hammy. The killer himself has the most suggestive voice, but it is hilarious, some of the dialogue and exchanges in this. Just a classic example is because he runs this low rent looking store which this woman of society comes into. So I sort of have to question that. What's she doing mixing in shady looking low rent stores like this? But then he is just the most suggestive guy you can imagine, where he's almost not trying to hide than he's a sleaze bag who's up to no good. Because he's just saying the most suggestive things, and what makes it funny for the comedy of the film is then she pauses and she's kind of saying, well, what do you mean? But she's not really questioning it in a serious way. She's not challenging him. He'll just say something to try and reassure her, and it's okay, that sounds good. When he starts talking about, I'll put on a feast that celebrates ancient Egyptians, she's like, oh, that sounds great, that sounds just what I want. And he'll slip in another line, and she'll question something. It's and then his final line in that scene is things have been done already. Things have been done for a long time, and he has the most sleazy sort of stilted voice, and yeah, she just goes away. The other funny thing are the cops in this movie, because one of the cops, called Pete, is in a relationship with the daughter, and the cops are just absolutely clueless. They're classic movie cops. All they can think to do is to put out bulletin on the news and on the radio to warn women in the local area, but they are just so slow cottoning on to anything, and you get they're really shrubby sort of cops with really dopey dialogue and some great cheesy acting, because at one point Pete screams, "It's uncanny," and they keep getting frustrated at how this crook this creepy guy slips through their fingers, but until the end of the film where things sort of fall in their lap, they're not really doing that much to sort of stop it. They're just casually like mooning about. The women in this film are just so like sexualized and so sort of casual, and it's a badly made movie. It's like really cheap and low rent. They keep playing this like bomb bomb bomb, just like drumming type noise every time like he's about to approach, and he like comes out of nowhere in slow motion. As I said, they don't really see him coming. There are some good gore effects, like the practical gore is effective, and this it's definitely quite satisfying, especially for the era. Like just some of the creativity and just how like creepy and slimy it kind of is. Like for example, him running his hands through like the girl's like flesh and on top of her head after like he's cut into her brain type thing. That actually looks pretty good, but the kills themselves, apart from like the effects and the aftermath, they don't really look that convincing. They look very sort of stilted. They're really telegraphed, but the stuff with the cops and the dopey cops is kind of amusing and funny, because at the end you do get like a fitting death for the killer where he ends up in the back of a garbage truck and he actually gets killed that way. And I was sort of thinking that's a fitting death for him, and that's what they say like when they realise, because this guy has accidentally killed him. It's not on purpose, so it's just this hilarious like comedic moment that he happens to end up in the back of the truck, and it's very convenient because it sort of does the work for them. And when they show up and see he's been killed by the guard truck, that's sort of what they say really. They say, "You don't know it, pal, but you just did this town the biggest service you could ever do." And they've got like these really like tough sounding sort of like dialogue lines where it's kind of things like it's a fitting death for a piece of trash, and just stuff like that where they're just. And then Pete actually does this long monologue where he describes, pieces together how he cracked the case, just all the evidence. It's like this weird sort of detective type thing where he's like laying out beat for beat how he cracked a case, but it just fell into their lap. It was like a total accident, and this garbage guy did their work for him. Just rid the town of this creep bag. They were a step behind for the whole movie, so it's just so hilarious them taking the credit for doing this. And there's some really hokey, over the top, funny scenes like him getting the Egyptian statue out and sort of praying to that and making the chants, and what he tries to do to like the daughter, and like passes it off as this is like a legit sort of ceremony. There's a terrible whip scene where he's actually whipping someone, which looks ridiculously phony, because like it's a number of whips in the scene without like an edit, but you can tell like he's not even touching her, and the sound effect is so bad you can tell it's a sound effect. You can tell it's not the legitimate sound of the whip hitting her. It looks really bad, but there's some fun to be had. It's like, for a sleazy driving style audience, that this will tick some of the boxes, and the gore moments at least aren't bad, but there's some terrible acting, there's some hammy dialogue, and it's a really like trippy sort of style plot, which I think it's a badly put together movie. Like from scene to scene, it seems to be so randomly put together and just really cobbled together. But there are certain moments that are quite thrilling and quite fun for just how sort of goofy it is, and just the way it's like slapped together with almost like tape. So it's a bad movie. I'm gonna give it 4 out of 10 because it is a bit of a chore to watch, but there's no doubt it's worth watching. It's on Shudder, as I said. It's worth ticking that sort of horror box, but it's not that much to write home about. It's interesting. Then it's the first movie that's credited with being like a really sort of gore type movie. It's like the first gore movie that is quite interesting. So I guess at least for the era, it's pretty shocking in the violence. But there you have it. That's Blood Feast. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen this movie, and I'll be back with another horror review tomorrow. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.